Hey guys, tonight we step into a chilly, torch-lit courtyard where the scent of damp stone curls around your ankles and the distant drip of water echoes off crumbling walls. You probably won't survive this bath without a shiver. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see who's braving the dark with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward past a wooden tub half filled with murky water, pebbles crunching underfoot as you wonder if the pool is truly water or some alchemist's broth. In medieval Europe, you believe that bathwater could harbor deadly humors ready to seep into your skin, an idea so widespread that most folks avoided washing beyond a quick rinse. Mainstream historians point out that by the 14th century, communal bathing houses dotted cities like Paris and Rome, yet attendance fizzled as whispers spread that water stirred up toxins trapped beneath the skin's surface, releasing them into the bloodstream. Historians still argue whether this fear was driven by genuine medical theory or a savvy ploy by barbers who doubled as surgeons to corner the market on bloodletting cures. Strange as it sounds, people once thought that simply stepping into warm water could open pores wide enough to invite snake venom and dragon's breath straight into your veins, a fringe tidbit suggesting households sometimes sprinkled crushed crocodile dung into baths as a supposed sunscreen against poison. Imagine dabbing that on your nose before a soak. No SPF 30 would ever compete with dung in medieval DIY beauty routines. And yes, you remember that crocodile dung sunscreen joke I mentioned last week. You probably won't survive this without a raised eyebrow. You feel the breeze against damp skin as you edge closer to the tub, spotting buckets of herbs lining the stones. In 1500s Germany, physicians recommended infusing water with rosemary or wine to ward off miasma, since they believed disease rode on foul air. Historians still argue whether miasma theory genuinely stemmed from observation or served as a catch-all justification for unexplained epidemics. Modern asides remind you that today we worry about BPA in plastic bottles, so maybe medieval folks had the right fear, but the wrong culprit. A hush falls as the caretaker ladles steaming water into your basin. Each splash sends up twists of mist that kiss your cheeks like a ghostly finger. You shiver at the thought that those whispers of poison vapors weren't entirely baseless. Actually, lead pipes did sometimes leach into bathwater, causing real neurological woes. In fact, scholars calculate that Roman elites suffered lead poisoning partly from their elaborate aqueduct-fed baths, lending at least one germ of truth to medieval suspicions. You peer down at the surface and catch your own reflection wavering in the ripples. Yet bathing remained a luxury rather than a hygiene habit, especially outside monastic orders. Caring for cleanliness meant rubbing down with cloths or using perfumes to mask odors, which you might call medieval dry shampoo. Historians still argue whether clergy bans on baths were truly moral stances or practical measures against lustful encounters in steamy tubs. That debate bubbles like the suds you've been taught to fear. There's something almost cinematic about the scene, torches guttering, water trembling, and you, poised on the brink of either relief or ruin. A modern joke about Insta-influencers touting toxin-free cleanses cracks in your mind, because hey, some things never change. Yet for all the exaggerated perils, common folk did cling to a single fact: water kills germs. They just blamed the baths for doing the killing in reverse. You run a hand along the rough-hewn plank bench, recalling one last quirky detail. In Elizabethan England, young apprentices feared that suds would turn their hair green, so they patched together leather caps to protect their heads during wash day. It sounds ridiculous now, but imagine rocking a leather bonnet while everyone else sported crusty crustacean-infested locks. Those caps probably didn't stop any disease, but they did shield hair dye experiments gone wrong. As you lean closer to dip a toe, notice how your heart flutters with the same mix of dread and curiosity that gripped medieval souls. You sense the cool night air pressing against damp skin, punctuated by the crackle of distant hearths. The mainstream fact remains: medieval bathhouses once thrived across Europe until fear and shifting morals drove them into decline. The fringe belief stands: crocodile dung sunscreen and snake venom phobia kept you out of the water. And the debate endures. Historians still argue whether these taboos were rooted in real health risks or clever profiteering. You step away from the mist-shrouded tub and follow a narrow corridor lined with flickering candles, their wax tears pooling at your feet as you feel the hush of repression settle around you. Clerics in woolen robes once strutted through these halls, thumping pulpits as they preached that baths were indulgent temptations leading straight to sin, and you probably won't survive their sermons without a twitch of guilt. In 12th century France, Renowned church fathers like Bernard of Clairvaux denounced regular bathing as a conduit for lust and idleness, warning the faithful that soft skin invited carnal thoughts. Mainstream accounts describe councils of bishops forbidding monks from soaking more than once a year, insisting that mortification of the flesh, even through grime, was the holiest path to glory. Historians still argue whether these edicts targeted genuine moral decay or served as power plays to discipline wayward orders. You glide past a carved lectern and imagine a gaggle of pilgrims clutching their cloaks tight, eyes averted from others' sweat and stench. The smell of damp habits lingers in the air, reinforced by fringe whispers of a medieval scholar claiming that bathwater could awaken pagan spirits slumbering in your sinews. They said you'd feel phantom itches crawling across your arms, surely a divine test, or the work of vengeful nymphs upset by human cleanliness. You've heard stranger things this week, but this one still makes you squirm. As you approach an iron-bound door, settle in for a modern aside. Think of those influencers posting clean living juice cleanses. Only here, clergy preached a dirt cleanse, extolling virtues of unwashed piety. Peeling back a rusted latch, you enter a chapel where the faithful sat in pews so close you could count their fleas. Sermons reminded worshippers that the body was a vessel for the soul, and sparkling flesh risked overshadowing spiritual pursuits. In fact, church records note fines imposed on townsfolk who dared bathe in rivers on holy days, lest joyous bathing turn into unbearably lewd frolics. You run your fingertips over a scratched bench inscription, Thermi tempt spawn perdition. Remember that Latin. It means, baths tempt and spawn perdition. Yet beneath the austere veneer, monks sometimes smuggled secret hot baths in cloister cellars, believing warmth soothed stiff joints after long vigils. Historians still argue whether these hidden sauna rooms existed or are later embellishments by overly romantic chroniclers. The truth might be buried by centuries of soot and sermon transcripts. Your boots echo on flagstones as you wander into a smaller alcove where charcoal sketches show robed figures whipping themselves on cold marble floors, a penance for both body and soul. Here, the punitive spirit reached its zenith. Believers considered every lather a sin, every gentle scrub a flirtation with vanity. Ironically, these austerities sometimes backfired, driving some to take clandestine dips in forest pools, convinced their repressed yearnings made a muddy river more virtuous than a clear bathhouse. Pause for another quirky glimpse. In medieval England, women sometimes enlisted their children as smell judges, dispatching them to sniff cloaks and declare whether dirt warranted prayer or punishment. Those tiny connoisseurs of funk held veto power over a full week's worth of ablutions. Imagine a 5-year-old sniff test committee determining your hygiene schedule. And yet, the church framed it as holy oversight. Lighting shifts as you re-enter the corridor's gloom, and you sense the weight of prohibitions hanging heavy on every stone. You almost expect a lantern-bearing inquisitor to appear, demanding confession for your last wash. Instead, you find a basin with cold water and a single wooden bucket, an ambivalent nod to baptism's cleansing power, but nothing more. The irony drips. Spiritual purity demanded water, yet bodily purity threatened the spirit. You pace slowly, letting the echo of sermons reverberate in your chest. Remember that barbers charged extra for bloodletting inside churches? They capitalized on moral panic, offering spiritual cleansing for a price. Historians still argue whether barber surgeons fueled bath bans to monopolize treatments or merely answered genuine demand for medical services taboo in consecrated spaces. A stray beam of moonlight slices through a barred window, illuminating flecks of dust dancing like tiny penitents. You inhale the cold, earthy scent of stone and sweat and wonder if any of these rules ever saved a soul, or if they simply stoked fear to keep communities in line. Yet, the mainstream fact endures. By the 15th century, moral and religious authorities across Europe waged systematic campaigns against bathing, shaping hygiene for centuries. You slump against the wall, picturing monks trembling at the thought of rosemary-scented water as a gateway to moral disaster. That is the fringe detail you tuck into your memory. Some hermits wore leather gloves whenever they washed hands, fearing direct contact with water could dissolve their vows as easily as soap scoured the skin. It's a bizarre twist on ritual purity you can't unsee. The corridor stretches onward, and you prepare to move ahead, carrying the echoes of fearful sermons and whispered heresies. The mainstream lesson is clear. Moral and religious leaders wielded spiraling anxieties about lust and idleness to outlaw regular bathing. The quirky fact shines. Leather-gloved hermits and child smell judges shaped medieval hygiene. And the debate lingers. Historians still argue whether bath bans were genuine spiritual safeguards or shrewd tactics to consolidate ecclesiastical control. You push open a heavy oaken door and step into an open courtyard where the scent of damp earth and chalky ash hangs thick, as if the air itself is trying to scrub away your memories. You probably won't survive another deep breath without picturing 100 graves. During the mid-14th century Black Death, more than a third of Europe's population perished, and bathing became a suspect culprit. People thought that water opened pores wide enough to let plague miasmas right into your veins. Historians still argue whether fear of contagion was based on genuine observation or simply a desperate scapegoat for inexplicable death rates. You trail your fingertips along a low stone wall, smooth from tears and frantic prayers, and recall how plague doctors lugged bulky leather pouches filled with pestilence powder, a quirky mix of crushed pearls, ambergris, and ground mummy bone, strapped across their chests. They believed that inhaling these fumes would ward off disease, much like your modern buddy swears by ozone generators to kill germs in his apartment. You remember crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, chinchilla fur-lined plague masks were the medieval equivalent of a hairdryer, more fashion statement than function. A guide's lantern casts dancing shadows on half-collapsed arcades as you notice muddy footprints leading away from a hastily abandoned bathing trough. By 1350, ordinances in cities like Florence forbade public bathing during outbreaks, convinced that steamy water carried pestilential vapors from one sinner to the next. Mainstream records show that some governments even sealed wooden tubs shut with tar to prevent would-be bathers from unleashing hidden plagues. Historians still argue whether these bans actually slowed the spread of disease or simply funneled suffering into cramped, filthy homes. You feel the grit of ash underfoot and think of modern panic buying. Remember when toilet paper vanished overnight? Here, villagers stockpiled rosemary branches and frankincense, stuffing them into doorways to filter evil airs. It's like hoarding hand sanitizer, but with more incense and fewer squeaky pumps. One fringe chronicler claimed that people believed dead rats washed down into the sewers could crawl back up through the drains into your wash water, a fantastical image that kept a lot of medieval noses high above the ground. You crouch to inspect a rusted iron ring once used to fasten bathing tubs to carts, imagining peddlers rolling portable bathhouses through plague-ridden lanes. They advertised healthful waters, pumped from remote springs, only to be chased off by panicked citizens wielding clubs. You chuckle at the thought. Today we Uber everything, even groceries, but try ordering an at-home spa treatment during chaos and see what happens. As you rise, your cloak brushing against peeling plaster, consider that some physicians advised showering in cold rain rather than steamy baths, reasoning that cold water closed pores and trapped miasmas outside, an early take on freeze your fears away. Historians still argue whether these cold water cures did more harm than good, given the risk of hypothermia. You might compare it to online wellness gurus touting ice bath challenges. Chilly, painful, and maybe just another fad. Ahead, a low platform bears scorch marks from torches set by fearful mobs who blamed bathhouses for harboring plague victims. Fringe rumors told of secret midnight washings where diseased bodies soaked alongside the healthy. Surely a recipe for disaster, if it were true. Your mind flickers back to that leather-gloved hermit. Did he ever worry about frostbite? At least he kept his fingers. You sidestep a broken basin filled with murky rainwater and hear echoes of bell ringers tolling for the dead. The communal trust that once allowed strangers to share tubs dissolved into terror that someone else's filth might kill you. Mainstream historians note public bath revenues plummeted by over 90% in some regions during plague years, marking a hygiene collapse that lasted centuries. Historians still argue whether this economic blow was a necessary precaution or a tragic overreaction fueled by ignorance and fear. You pause under a gnarled oak, its roots cracking the flagged stones, and catch a sudden whiff of lavender drifting on the breeze, remnants of someone's desperate attempts at aromatherapy. They burned lavender bundles in smoky braziers, convinced scent could purify air just as surely as chlorine in a pool. It's a quaint notion until you remember those overpriced lavender-infused candles you bought last spring and lit exactly once. As you move on, the air grows colder, and you imagine dipping into that rain-filled trough instead of a warm tub. Yikes. You almost taste the grime left on skin after days without a proper wash, yet you're comforted by a modern aside. At least you're not wearing 14th-century undergarments, which were more like mobile lint traps than anything sanitary. The courtyard narrows into a dark alley of collapsed arches where the silence is broken only by distant rats scurrying over discarded cloth. Here, you sense the magnitude of loss driving every decision. People chose filth over water because they feared water would betray them. You smell damp straw and smoke and remember that apprentices once tested cloaks for odor before sale. Smell judges in action again, sniffing out potential plague carriers. Callback achieved. A sudden gust rattles the lantern, and you steel yourself for the next section, knowing that fear of disease reshaped societies far beyond mere hygiene habits. The mainstream reality remains. Epidemic paranoia convinced medieval Europeans that baths spread the Black Death. The quirky image lingers, pearl dust plague powders and shoulder-strap pest pouches. And the debate endures. Historians still argue whether these bans saved lives or doomed communities to even greater squalor. You trudge over uneven cobbles as a thin mist coils around your ankles, each step crunching with the promise of cold, before you glimpse a row of emptied firewood racks and realize that heat itself has become a scarce commodity. You probably won't survive a bath without burning half the forest. In medieval towns, heating enough water for a single tub required wheelbarrows of wood or sacks of coal, and fuel shortages during harvest seasons meant most people couldn't justify turning on the hearth for a mere scrub. Mainstream records from 13th century England note that families often saved up ash from hearth fires for weeks just to warm a small copper cauldron of bathwater. Historians still argue whether these shortages stemmed from actual deforestation or were exaggerated by water-fearing authorities to keep people away from potentially sinful steams. You kick aside a splintered bucket and imagine the labor, chopping wood until your arms ache, hauling it from distant coppices where trees stood sparse as sentinels in a barren field. Fringe accounts tell of a monk in Bavaria who tried heating his bath with discarded animal bones, proclaiming that marrow grease burned hotter than logs, though the stench of charred femur grease probably drove more guests away than it attracted. It's like swapping your gas stove for candlelit fondue. Sure, it's novel, but you'd rather just order takeout. As you round a corner, the looming outline of a broken wellhead greets you, its pulley rusted stiff by years of neglect. In most villages, there was no piped water at all, only drafty wells that froze solid by December. By the time you'd hauled buckets up a sheer shaft, the water inside would cling to ice around the edges, leaving you a tepid slush rather than a soothing soak. Mainstream surveys of manor records in northern France reveal that peasants sometimes used melted snow for washing, believing the crisp cold killed lice better than any scrub brush. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or confined to especially cruel winters. You shiver as a gust whistles through a shattered roof, scattering loose straw that skitters like frightened mice across the stone floor. The cold sinks into your bones, and you picture a rural blacksmith's daughter stamping her feet on the earthen floor before daring to dip a toe into an ice-filled trough. Quirky folklore claims she once lured her siblings into a makeshift sauna by lighting peat inside a hollowed log, but ended up roasting them more than steaming them. Hardly a spa day. It's the medieval version of that time your friend tried a backyard DIY hot tub with bricks and a bonfire. Best intentions, tragic results. Up ahead, a skeletal frame of what must have been a communal bathhouse stands with half its walls tumbled down, vines weaving through gaping windows like nature's reclamation project. No chimneys remain, which explains why survivors stoked fires only in small iron cauldrons. Imagine trying to split an entire cauldron's worth of wood among 20 bathers. In Vienna, municipal ledgers show that bathhouse operators added a substantial fire levy to each admission, pricing out all but the wealthy. Historians still argue whether these levies were instituted purely to recoup costs or as a covert tax to discourage commoners from gathering. After all, unsupervised soaking could lead to unsavory gossip. You trail your hand along a moss-covered pillar, recalling that leather-gloved hermits once donned padded mittens over their gloves to open frozen taps, fearing direct contact with cursed water. That callback to their protective rituals feels oddly familiar. Just like the crocodile dung sunscreen and plague powder pouches, humanity keeps inventing straitjackets for everyday needs. A cold drip taps your shoulder, and you notice cracks in the stone floor where pooled water froze and shattered the masonry each winter. Bathhouses had no insulation, so proprietors boarded up windows come December, turning the space into a tomb of stale air until spring thaw. The mainstream fact asserts that across Europe, few establishments opened more than 3 months a year due to freezing temperatures and high fuel costs. You peer through a collapsed arch to see rusted iron hoops that once bound wooden staves into barrels, portable bath kits that itinerant nobles raced through the countryside, hoping to warm their muscles after a day of jousting. Fringe stories claim one count's entourage carried 8 barrels and a team of 6 grooms just to ensure his bath followed his hunt, yet half the barrels leaked, creating muddy rivers behind their procession. Think of it as the medieval version of overpacking your luggage for a weekend getaway, only to discover TSA took your shampoo. A frigid draft snakes through the ruin, carrying a faint scent of mold and burnt peat. You recall that apprentices sniff-tested laundry water too, but rarely with the intent to bathe. Most washed garments only once a year, claiming constant laundering wore out fine seams. It's like loving a vintage leather jacket but never cleaning it because you fear losing that perfect worn-in scent. As you step over a rotted plank, the distant clang of an anvil echoes. Blacksmiths prize the warmth of their forges for more than weapon-making. Some villagers timed their bathing to coincide with forge hours, daring to linger near the iron embers long enough to soak in cauldrons heated by hot coals. Yet even those brave souls risked burns from flying sparks, and many gave up after one singed eyebrow. A shaft of weak sunlight cuts through cracked roof tiles, spotlighting splinters of colored glass that once adorned a modest stained glass window above a soaking pool. It strikes you that while wealthy spa patrons enjoyed tinted baths framed by Gothic tracery, commoners made do with slate slabs and chipped mugs of tepid water. Modern asides flicker in your mind. Consider those luxury spa retreats charging hundreds per night, while budget hotels offer a crowded chlorinated pool. Some things never change, except the price tag. You slow your pace, letting the hush of abandonment settle over you. The mainstream reality remains: medieval infrastructure limitations, wood shortages, uninsulated baths, and freezing winters made routine bathing an impractical luxury for all but the wealthy. The quirky image lingers: bone-fueled bathtubs and leaking portable barrel baths trailing muddy streams. And the debate endures. Historians still argue whether material constraints or lingering superstitions played the greater role in driving baths into ruin. You slip through a narrow archway into a courtyard warmed by curling wisps of steam rising from stone vats. An intoxicating scent of eucalyptus and cedar drifts past your nose as if inviting you into a serene trance. After centuries of fear and avoidance, by the 16th century a slow renaissance of communal bathing emerges, influenced by Moorish hammams in Spain and Ottoman saunas in Eastern Europe. Mainstream records show that cities like Venice and Istanbul bristle with public bathhouses once more, complete with vaulted ceilings, marble benches, and intricate waterworks transporting heated water from distant furnaces. Historians still argue whether this revival stemmed from genuine health reforms or a fashionable craze among elites eager to outshine their neighbors. You tread along mosaic floors that glimmer with damp candlelight, recalling how monks once decried soft skin as sinful. Now patrons recline on warm slabs, eyes half closed, muscles unfurling in languid release. Fringe accounts whisper that some bathhouse proprietors experimented with smoke baths, filling vaults with aromatic wood smoke meant to cleanse both body and spirit. Imagine mistaking a lungful of cedar smoke for relaxation. No essential oil diffuser could compete with that medieval lung cleanse. You probably won't survive the first cough without laughing. A yurt-like domed chamber ahead beckons you in. Steam coils around your ankles as attendants drizzle scented oils onto heated stones, producing hisses that echo like friendly dragons. You feel the gentle warmth seep into your joints, banishing the chill that plagued your bones back in Section 4. Remember how portable barrel baths leaked muddy streams through cobbled streets? Here, water flows pristine from lead-free pipes, a triumph of Renaissance engineering and greater awareness of lead's dangers. Historians still argue whether the adoption of safer piping owed more to medical discoveries or pure aesthetic preferences. You recline against cool marble, watching flickers of light play across arched windows. Patrons whisper quietly, exchanging gossip in this sanctum once condemned as a den of vice. Callback to those moral bans in Section 2. Now, laughter murmurs where once sermons thundered. One curious rumor tells of a Venetian bathhouse offering live goldfish in the footbaths, believed to nibble away dead skin, a fringe spa treatment that probably left visitors describing their toes as ticklish sushi rolls. It sounds silly now, but you might pay extra for a robotic fish pedicure today. Some trends really do circle back. A vaulted gallery leads you to a cold plunge pool, its turquoise waters glinting under glass mosaics. You brace yourself, remembering the 14th century plague-era fix of freezing rain showers detailed in Section 3. Cold closes pores to miasmas, they claimed. Now, cold plunges are healthful, touted for boosting circulation and clarity of mind. Modern asides drift through your thoughts. Biohackers ice bathe in Nordic tubs while sipping kombucha, chasing the same tang of invigoration seasoned adventurers once sought centuries ago. Behind you, a heated bench labeled Herbal Infusion beckons. An attendant douses rosemary, mint, and rose petals onto hot coals, releasing a fragrant billow that comforts like a grandmother's wool shawl. You inhale deeply, tasting the herbaceous sharpness mingled with warm stone. Mainstream guides of the era recommended these botanicals for everything from stiff limbs to melancholy, a reminder that medieval remedies often combined practical knowledge with a dash of hopeful magic. Historians still argue whether these herbal steams truly eased ailments or simply pleased the senses. Outside, a narrow balcony overlooks a private plunge sunk into the earth, a grotto lit by torches and framed by creeping ivy. A wealthy patron once commissioned a bathhouse adorned with live peacocks, their calls echoing amid the steam, an eccentric fringe flourish that likely frightened more guests than it impressed. You can't help but smirk at the thought of aristocrats wrestling feathers and humidity while seeking relaxation. You rise to explore private alcoves where attendants massage sore shoulders with oils infused from imported spices, nutmeg, cinnamon, even sandalwood, luxuries far pricier than gold in earlier times. It's a far cry from the bone-fueled braziers of Section 4 or the makeshift saunas of hermits who donned padded mittens to open frozen taps. Here, comfort reigns supreme, and water is worshipped rather than shunned. As you drift toward the exit, you notice bulletin boards advertising mineral mud wraps and marmot fat scrubs, fringe treatments promising youth and vigor. Think of the crocodile dung sunscreen from Section 1. Humanity's quest for beauty and health is unending, though the ingredients may change. You chuckle, realizing modern spas charge exorbitant rates for ingredients far less bizarre than pulverized mummies or marrow-laced fires. Stepping back into the cool night air, you carry with you the memory of gentle steam caressing skin, fragrant clouds dissolving tension, and architectural marvels crafted to elevate bathing into ritual. The mainstream triumph is clear. By blending practical engineering with evolving medical knowledge, early modern societies reclaimed baths as centers of health and social life. The quirky tableau remains. Goldfish foot spas and marmot fat wraps remind you that novelty never sleeps. And the debate continues. Historians still argue whether this bathing renaissance marked genuine progress in public health or simply another ephemeral fad driven by status and spectacle. You lean against a cool stone balustrade as the moonlight bathes the courtyard in silver. The wind whispers through carved arches, carrying the faint aroma of eucalyptus and distant cedar smoke, and you feel the day's tension loosen like mist at sunrise. Let your breathing ease. Each inhale draws in calm, each exhale carries away worry. You've journeyed from fearful baths of old, where water signified danger and moral peril, to renovated halls where steam becomes a gentle embrace. Imagine the gentle hiss of hot water, the softness of oil-dusted skin, and the hush of whispered conversations blending into a lullaby just for you. No more fear of crocodile dung or plague powders, only the warm promise of comfort and restoration. Your heart slows, matching the measured drip of water in the distance. In these final moments before sleep, remember that every ritual begins with a single drop, and every fear dissolves when met with understanding. Allow your thoughts to drift on fragrant herb-scented steam, drifting like petals on a slow river. Let the warmth seep into your limbs, cradle your mind, and hum you toward rest. Now, as the embers of this tale glow faintly behind your eyelids, surrender to the soft darkness. Sweet dreams await beyond the edge of your consciousness, where water is gentle, stone is warm, and every sigh finds its way home. End of script. Sweet dreams.